Welcome to Civil War Digital Digest. I'm Will. Well, we're at the home office of Mark Krausz from agents Pelican and Campbell. Our travels have brought us here to suburban Chicago. We want to say thanks to Mark for hosting us, and he's one of our CWDD coffee grinders. Our patrons on Patreon, which you can find linked to up here, do so much to help us financially. We'd love to have you check out becoming part of them. Today we're going to talk about the musket tools that it took to support the American weapons in the Civil War. Let's get started. We start here. I recognize these weapons. What is this?
That's right. These are the model 1816 musket that was a smoothbore weapon, and these were issued from 1817 onward. So we have a Type 1 in the original flintlock configuration, and then we also have a Type 3 Springfield musket, model 1816, that was converted to percussion.
Great. Well, we did a whole episode on these a while ago, so let's check off the weapons on the list. But they're here not only for display, but they're going to drive us to our job today, and that is the tools. What am I looking at? Do we have any categories here?
Yes. So what we have laid out is the primary and secondary appendages. These tools were broken into two groups. So you have the primary, which as a private, once you were issued your weapon, you should be expected to be issued one of these as well. And then you have the secondary tools on the right, and these were issued at a ratio of about 1 per every 10 men, or 1 for the sergeants of each company.
So, okay, I'm a private. I got issued an 1816, whether in Flint or as a conversion. What's my primary tools?
So your primary tools for the 1816 will be a screwdriver and a wiper.
Okay, what's the screwdriver?
So your screwdriver is going to be the J tool in front there, and that was used in, you had the screwdriver side and you also had the round side. The round side would be used to tighten the cock on top of the flint, and the screwdriver would be used to service any number of the screws on the weapon.
Okay. I just got issued an 1816 that's converted to percussion. That J-hook's not going to do me a lot of good. Now what?
Correct. So a hypothesis that I have is that some of the tools that we regard as the model 1841-1842 combination tool were actually issued with the model 1816 conversions, because you need to have a cone screw to remove the cone of the 1816 musket. And you can also use the different screwdrivers to service the screws on the 1816 musket.
Well, that makes sense. We go to percussion when we go to the 42 Springfield, and we're converting the 16s at the same time.
That's right.
Okay, and down below them on the primaries?
So down below are 3 different types of wipers. In the earlier issue of the 1816s, the wipers were elongated, and that you would see in the middle. In the 1850s, they came up with a shorter wiper design, and that would be the wiper on the far left. And then on the right side is believed to be a contract issue wiper that would have probably been issued in the 1850s, 1860s for the war.
Great. Okay, so every private has some form of a wrench and a wiper.
Yes.
Now we go to the second group there and what you call the secondaries. What are we looking at?
So the secondary appendages are going to be, on the bottom you have ball pullers, and these are made to screw into the musket ball and remove them from the weapon without having to discharge it. On top you have 2 different types of vices. You have the long bar, and that's generally regarded as the mainspring vice for the conversion muskets, and it's very distinct because it has such a long bar. The smaller of the 2 vices is a frizzen spring vice. However, it could also have been used for the sear spring in the lock internals on the musket. So Jim Schaefer and I have talked about this tool, the smaller of the 2 tools, and we have an identical version that was dug in the 1930s in Harper's Ferry for the frizzen spring. This tool is slightly larger, thereby possibly being used for the sear spring. It's a hypothetical discussion, but it's a rare tool in that it's the only one known not to be dug.
And it's a hypothetical discussion between you and Jim. Tell me who Jim is.
Jim wrote volumes 1 and 2 of the gun tool in their identification books, and he was the first person to really start to try to categorize these tools, because as complicated as the muskets can be, the gun tools are even more complicated in their variations and their lack of surviving originals.
Okay, Great. Well, that's all the metal tools there. There's still 2 pieces left. What do we have?
So each private would also have been issued a tompion. And so what we have is a maple-made wooden tompion that would go into the end of the muzzle to keep debris from going into the barrel. On top of that is the Woolman's Pattern 1863 tompion, and those could be inserted into the barrel, and the top could be screwed, which would expand the base of the tompion and make a rubber-tight seal.
Wow, fantastic. Well, there we go. There's the 1816, but I think our day's just started. Let's reset
Yes.
the table and look at the next round.
Okay.
Well, we flipped it around and we're back, and if you've followed Civil War Digital Digest for long, you know Mark and Jason have a passion for the Hall rifle, and it's the next one chronologically on our list. Tell me a little bit about what we're looking at on the table, Mark.
All right. So for your primary appendages in this rifle, you're going to be issued a wiper that you would see in front and a combination tool of sorts in the just above it. And you'll notice that it does have that roundish end that's a point that could also be used to tighten the cock, but it also has a screwdriver. Your secondary appendages are at an issued rate of 1 per 10 men would be the ball puller and a mainspring vise for the Hall rifle.
Okay, talk to me. A bullet mold for a musket?
That's right. So when these rifles were shipped off with all their appendages and tools, there should have been 2 bullet molds per 20 muskets, or 20 rifles in this case. And so these molds were issued to the men, and it's something that they were probably not expected to make their own ammunition, but they're expected to possibly have the ability to make their bullets when the time came.
And that's as common, sort of almost at a sergeant or NCO level
Yes.
as the vice is.
Yes, it is.
Okay, and I guess the thing for us to remember in the Civil War world, we're used to seeing mini balls because of the Civil War
Correct.
era, but this being an 1824 marked musket, that's a round ball.
That's correct.
Okay, great. Well, let's flash down and find out what we're going to see next. We'll be right back. Here we go, the Mississippi rifle. We're missing the bayonet today, but all the appendages are here.
Correct.
What are we looking at?
So right now we're still looking at primary and secondary appendages. And what we have with their primary appendages, you would have a combination tool. They've added a cone wrench, they've also added screwdrivers, and they've riveted that all together, and that's what you have with the 1841 rifle combination tool. You also have the longer wiper, and then in 1855s, they came out with a shorter wiper for the rebored 58 caliber Mississippi rifles. And then the secondary appendages, you're going to have, once again, the mainspring vise for the Mississippi rifle, but you also have the long elongated ball puller. And again, with the 1855 series, they came out with a shorter version of the ball puller. And lastly, we have a tompion.
Okay, and the tompion is that part of the regular issue?
It's, by the time of the Civil War, yes, it was.
Okay, but when initially this weapon came out?
Correct. Initially, it was not thought of as a general issue, but as the year, there's lots of arguing back and forth among the different people in the government, and then finally in the 1850s, they came out and decided that everybody's going to receive a tompion with their general issue.
So if we're looking during the Civil War,
Correct.
we're going to look at the short wiper, the short ball screw, and the tompion as being part of the kit.
That's right.
And the longer of the two is previous and has seen its way out.
That's right.
We may see it, but it's not the most common.
That's right. And these would all be able to fit inside the patch box on the rifle.
Well, great. Well, let's flip this around and let's take a look at the next weapon.
Okay.
Well, we're back. It's the model 1842 musket. Mark, tell me a little bit about the weapon and why the tools.
The 1842 musket is the first percussion-produced musket in the United States. And what we have is primary and secondary appendages. We have a consolidated tools with the closed head cone wrench, and we have 2 screwdrivers for that weapon. We also have 2 wipers for the 1842. Then we move into our secondary appendages, and what we have is 2 mainspring vices with slight variations among them, and a ball puller. Again, these are issued at 1 per 10 men.
Okay, great. Well, talk to me. Why the 2 wipers?
So the 2 wipers have slight variations. One was produced in for the 1842 series, and in the 1850s as time progressed, these wipers got lost or slight variations. They came out with different styles. So they're very similar, but they have just slight variations. And as a collector, some people collect those variations, and I'm one of them.
Okay, but for a private in the field, he's going to get one wiper, it's going to fit the end of the ramrod, and you're going to clean the weapon.
That's
with it.
right.
Okay, and for the probably sergeant, the same with the vice. We're just looking at two variations.
Correct.
Okay, so at the end of the table, the two pieces there.
So what we have is two tompions. One is a maple wood. We also have the Wilmot's patent tompion, which has a rubber seal, which would have been much tighter, and that would have been a privately purchased item.
Great. Well, let's turn the table around, and we'll be right back with the next weapon. Mark and I are going to talk a little bit about the Model 1855 Springfield. Mark, if you want to walk me through what's on the table.
Okay. So the 1862 Ordnance Manual discusses the 1855 rifle, and what we have is a combination tool. We have tompions and we have wipers, and these three, again, are going to be regarded as primary appendages. So each...
Okay, so we've made a change here. The tompion's now over with our primaries.
Correct. They finally, the Ordnance Department finally sorted themselves out, and they said, every soldier's going to be issued one of these, and we're going to put it in the manual. And we're not just going to assume that every soldier's going to be issued one of these tompions. And so with that, we have two 1855 combination tools. The distinction between the tools is that one has a U.S. stamp, the other does not. Presumably, the U.S. stamp means that it's Harper's Ferry produced. However, there's no definitive proof to say otherwise. Generally, among collectors, we believe that this is a Harper's Ferry, but we just can't say positively.
So we move over to the secondary appendages.
That's right. So looking at the secondary appendages, again, we have a ball puller. We also have a mainspring vise, and we also have two tumbler punches. And just like the U.S. combination tool with the U.S. stamp, the tumbler and band spring punches, one of them does have a U.S. stamping, again, presumably making this a Harper's Ferry produced example.
So let me ask you something about the secondary appendages as a group. Since things are changing a little bit in the Ordnance Manual, are we still seeing them at about 1 per 10 weapons?
We are still seeing them at about 1 per 10. Again, the band springs and mainspring vise, for example, in the ball puller, we don't want the average private to be disassembling or working on their weapon too much. And so they don't need to be issued to every single soldier.
Okay, great. And we see a new appendage here. Will you talk to me about the tumbler punch and what it's used for?
So the tumbler punches and band spring punches are used to remove the band springs from the 1855 series of rifles and also to remove the tumbler. And so that's represented by the two punches. You'll see one is a fatter head and one's a narrow head to fit into the band spring and knock those springs out that hold the barrel bands in place.
Well, let's get it reset, and we're going to go see one of the more common weapons of the Civil War. We'll be right back. This is the 61 Springfield. Mark, talk to me about what we've got here.
Okay, we have the tompions that every soldier is going to be issued. We have two different styles. We have the maple wood ones that were issued, and we have two commercially produced and available to the soldiers. We have an expandable cork, and we have the Wilmot's patent tompion.
Okay, so this one right here is actually corked like a wine bottle. So you're going to stopper it much like you'd think about putting a cork back in a wine bottle
Very
these
much
days.
so, yes.
And you'll protect the inside of the bore that way.
That's right. And then moving over to the combination tools and the wipers, these are again primary issue. However, we're still using the 1855 tools until they're used up. The government's not going to issue brand new tools right away. They're going to still issue the soldier what they had in store.
And the 55 combination tool is the one with two additional screwdrivers on there,
That's
right?
right. That's right. And below that, what to many collectors and reenactors, what they think of as the 1863 model combination tools, actually, we have two different styles. We have a Colt-produced combination tool with just the one screwdriver arm, and then we have a contract-made 1861 combination tool with another one single swivel arm.
How do I tell the difference between those two?
The two differences between these two tools is the notch in the head. The tool in the middle here, we have more of a square for the cone, and then we have a slightly rounded notch for that tool. And those are, again, for the 1861 contract and model Springfield rifles.
Great. Well, let's move down to the wipers.
Very similar style with the 1855 wiper, but as you can see below that, it looks like an elongated model 1863 wiper. What that really is the 1861 contract wiper. And then below that, very similar to the 1816 wiper that was contract produced in the 1850s, 1860s for the war, we have another, it's a very similar design for the 1861 series.
Let's move over to the secondary appendages.
We have the mainspring vices, we have a contract-produced mainspring vice, and we have a U.S.-made mainspring vice. Below that, we still have a very similar design ball puller with the rounded shoulders, and then moving over, we still have the very similar band spring and tumbler punches that have not changed yet.
Well, we're back, and this is the final of the U.S.-made weapons that we're going to look at today. This is the 1863 Springfield. What do you have to say here, Mark?
Appendage-wise, you're very much looking at the same number of appendages issued to the soldier. So primary is still issued to every soldier, and the same primary tools are still being issued in the same ratio. And then you also have your secondary. So again, we have our tompions that are being issued to each soldier. We have 3 combination tools from the 1863 era model, and we have the wiper with a short base. And you'll notice that the short based wiper is very much similar to the model 1861 contract wiper, and that goes along the lines of copying some efficient designs.
Great, and I see when we look at the combination tools in the primary, we've lost a leaf here, and we're now solidly in only one additional screwdriver.
That's right. There's no bolster screw, so there's no need to have that screwdriver. So they removed it, and now you're down to just one arm.
Okay, and I do see the bottom of the combination tools has a cutout at the end. What do you know about that?
So that's another one of those oddball items that collectors have stumbled upon. And so that was probably either a contract produced piece, or it was field modified to possibly used on the rear sight of the Springfield series rifles. But we're just not sure.
Okay. And of course, the rear sight does go on this weapon, just this original that we've been graced to use doesn't have it currently. Okay. Let's move on to the secondary appendages. They look really familiar to me.
That's right. We're still seeing the same mainspring vices in shape and design, and one has a US again for Harper's Ferry presumably, and the other does not. The ball pullers have shifted in design a little bit. Instead of being a rounded shoulders, they're becoming much more of a square shoulder. And we also had the band spring punches and for tumbler punch, and these are still being issued at about 1 per 10 men.
Well, there's the musket tools for most of the American-made weapons of the Civil War. By themselves, they're bits of metal. Put together in context here, we hope you find a greater connection to what the American forces went through during the Civil War. We'll see you in a few weeks.